the 2005 Unley granny murder that sent shockwaves across Australia. If you're ready to face the truth about those who targeted her, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. She's the apple of my eye. It's a phrase we often hear from grandmothers, their faces beaming with love as they cuddle their grandkids. After a lifetime of tightening their belts and raising their own kids, a grandchild in the twilight years must feel like life's final, greatest blessing. Here in Adelaide, for 1 year, old Helen Carter, there was one such treasure in her life, her brilliant granddaughter, studying at a prestigious university in Sydney. The same little girl who used to cling to her nan's skirt, one day, shows up in Adelaide completely unannounced. Can you imagine Helen's joy? She would have welcomed her in, saying, "You must be exhausted after that long trip," and sliced up a cold, refreshing watermelon to help her beat the heat. But her granddaughter hadn't come for a friendly catch-up. In her bag was a sharp knife and a roll of gaffer tape she'd prepared in advance. This is the story of the 2005 Unley granny murder, a case that horrified the nation, a crime that showed how, in the face of greed, the sacred bond of blood, forged over 80 years, can be brutally severed. Today, we tell the story of the most cruel of visitors, those who came wearing the mask of family. If you're ready for the truth, please subscribe and like this video. The 15th of August, 2005. It was a crisp, clear winter's day. While the rest of the country went about its business, a quiet, leafy street in the affluent suburb of Unley, Adelaide, was unusually still. On this street, Helen Carter's house was always a place that felt like home. She was an industrious woman, the kind who started her day at the crack of dawn, hanging laundry on the hill's hoist in the backyard and sweeping the front path, the rhythmic scratch of the broom, a familiar sound in the neighborhood. But something was wrong. For 3 days, no one had seen Helen. The morning paper, the Advertiser, was still rolled up tightly in the letterbox, yellowing in the sun. On the front step, the pouch for the daily milk delivery was bulging, on the verge of splitting open. For a woman who believed a messy house is a messy mind, and was always the first one up, this was cause for concern among her neighbors. "Helen, you in there? It's David from next door." Her neighbor, David, couldn't shake a bad feeling. The curtains in the main bedroom, visible over the fence, were drawn tight. For days, not even the faint sound of the radio had drifted from the house. Could she, an elderly woman living alone, have collapsed from a fall or a sudden illness? David cautiously pushed the front gate. The heavy iron gate, which was always securely latched, creaked open with an unnerving groan. As soon as he stepped towards the front door, the smell hit him the metallic tang of old blood mixed with the sour scent of rotting food. The living room was in complete chaos. The drawers of a beautiful antique cedar chest had been ripped out and thrown across the floor. A mahogany wardrobe that Helen had cherished her whole life stood open, its contents strewn everywhere. It was a scene of utter devastation, as if a cyclone had torn through the house. And there, at the epicenter of the chaos, under the kitchen table, was Helen Carter. She was dressed in a comfortable floral housecoat, but the fabric was stained a deep, dark red. There were multiple stab wounds on her neck and chest, and the pool of blood on the linoleum floor had already dried to a dark, rusty crust. The autopsy would later reveal that Helen Carter had been dead for 3 days. But what truly broke the hearts of the detectives who arrived on the scene was an object lying next to her body, a half-eaten plate of watermelon and a small paring knife. It meant she'd had a visitor. Helen Carter had welcomed the very person who came to take her life, graciously offering them a cool slice of watermelon to ease their journey. Who could repay such kindness with such monstrous cruelty? The detectives knew instinctively this was no simple robbery. The front door hadn't been forced, and as the plate of watermelon suggested, it was highly likely someone Helen knew, someone she would have opened the door for without a second thought. The investigation began, a quest to uncover the sad truth of an old woman's final moments, betrayed by someone she trusted most, in the kitchen of her own home, the one place she should have been safest. Helen Carter's hands were as wrinkled and tough as old leather. Born in 1924, she was part of a generation that had endured the Great Depression and World War II. For her, life wasn't about comfort. It was a brutal battlefield for survival. Having lost her husband in the war, Helen became a widow at a young age and learned to be tough as nails. She set up a stall at the Adelaide Central Market, selling fruit and veg, and took on cleaning jobs for other families, scraping together every dollar she could. She endured it all with a single-minded determination. Even if she had to live on toast and tea, her only daughter would have the opportunities she never did. My Sharon, she's a university-educated woman, you know. That was Helen Carter's greatest pride, her badge of honor. Even after her daughter, Sharon, married a man from Sydney and moved away, leaving Helen alone in Adelaide, her motherly love never faded. She would haggle over 50 cents for a bunch of silver beet at the market. But the moment she heard her daughter and granddaughter were coming to visit, she would head straight to the best butcher in town to buy the most expensive cuts of steak and the sweetest fruit. Then, in 1985, a new treasure entered her life. Her granddaughter, Chloe, was born. To Helen, Chloe was the apple of her eye, a precious part of her. Every time Chloe visited Adelaide for Christmas or Easter, Helen would dig into her well-worn purse and pull out a crisp, new $50 note. "Here you go, love. Buy yourself something nice back in Sydney." Helen's love was unpolished, but its weight was immeasurable. When Chloe was accepted into the prestigious University of Sydney, it was Helen who was the proudest, throwing a party for her neighbors and handing out cakes to celebrate. But Helen had a habit, a secret she never spoke of, or rather, felt she couldn't. Having spent her life dealing in cash at the market, Helen Carter didn't trust banks. Her distrust deepened after the 1990s recession, when she saw people around her lose their life savings in bank collapses. "The only person you can trust to look after your money is yourself," she'd say. So Helen kept her entire life savings, $100,000 in cash, neatly wrapped in newspaper, and hidden deep inside a linen press in her bedroom wardrobe. What kind of money was this? It was the physical embodiment of her blood, sweat, and tears, earned over a lifetime of hard work, of wearing hand-me-down clothes and smelling of dirt from the market. To Helen, it wasn't just a bundle of paper. It was her security for old age, and a final safety net she could offer her daughter's family if they ever fell on hard times. Tragically, however, that love, hidden away so carefully in her wardrobe, became the root of all evil. She could never have dreamed that the nest egg meant to protect her family would become the noose that tightened around her own neck, because only a handful of people in the world knew where that secret stash was hidden. Australia in 2005. The country may have been emerging from the long shadow of the 90s recession, but its after-effects still lingered like a fungus in corners of society. Promoters were everywhere, aggressively pushing credit card applications, and among the youth, a craze for designer brands that were well beyond their means had taken hold. In the heart of this city of desire, Sydney specifically, its most glamorous pocket, Paddington was Helen Carter's beloved granddaughter, Chloe Thompson. Chloe was 20 years old at the time, a bright student at the University of Sydney. To her grandmother in Adelaide and to her parents, she was the perfect daughter and granddaughter. When she visited for holidays, she was the quiet girl who would politely cut fruit for the adults and nod sweetly at their stories. But in Sydney, Chloe wore a completely different face. She was more likely to be found checking in at a trendy Paddington cafe or a club in King's Cross than attending a lecture. Perhaps Chloe wanted to deny her reality. She was the daughter of a comfortable, middle-class family, but her sights were set on a life she couldn't possibly afford. She envied her friends' designer handbags and coveted their European cars. While her grandmother was pinching pennies in Adelaide, Her granddaughter was blowing hundreds of dollars on a single night out, and always by her side was her friend, Beck Miller. Beck was a year older than Chloe, 21, and already mixed up in the world of nightlife and gambling. They were inseparable, described as two peas in a pod. But what they shared wasn't friendship, but a path to ruin. Beck whispered poison in Chloe's ear. "You only live once. You've got to enjoy it," and the easily influenced Chloe walked willingly into the trap. A shopping addiction soon led to credit card debt. To pay off one card, she'd take out another, beginning a vicious cycle of debt. By the winter of 2005, Chloe's debt had spiraled into the tens of thousands of dollars, an amount impossible for a university student to manage. The calls from debt collectors were relentless, and the interest on a secret payday loan she'd taken out without her parents' knowledge was compounding, strangling her. Behind the glamorous facade was an ugly truth. She was no longer a top university student. She was a fugitive, hunted by debt. "I need money, a lot of money." Chloe's mind was consumed by a single thought. The sensible idea of getting a part-time job to pay it off was long gone. She needed a way to get a lot of money, fast and easy. As she and Beck racked their brains, a memory from Mother's Day back in May flashed through Chloe's mind. The image of her grandmother's back as she opened the wardrobe in the bedroom. A thick bundle of cash, wrapped in newspaper. Her Nan's voice saying she kept $100,000 in cash hidden in the wardrobe because she didn't trust banks. In that moment, to Chloe, Helen Carter was no longer the loving grandmother who had helped raise her. She was a walking ATM, a solution to all her financial problems. The devil's whisper was sweet, and the lure of money was far more powerful than the bond of blood. They started to plan. Transport to Adelaide. Tools to restrain her grandmother. The granddaughter she trusted most was preparing to become her most terrifying predator. The seeds of tragedy had been sown on what should have been the happiest of days. The 8th of May, 2005. Mother's Day. Sharon, Chloe's mother, brought her daughter down to Adelaide to visit Helen. A house bustling with family, a beautiful roast lunch prepared by her daughter, and a red carnation pinned to her dress by her granddaughter. For Helen Carter, it was a day of pure happiness. After lunch, during the lazy afternoon, Sharon was in the kitchen doing the dishes while Chloe lay on the sofa, watching TV. It was then that Helen quietly called her daughter into the bedroom. It seemed she had something she wanted to show only her daughter. "Come here a minute, love." With trembling hands, Helen reached deep into the linen press inside the wardrobe and pulled out her hidden treasure. Wrapped in yellowed newspaper was $100,000 in cash, thick wads of $50 and $100 notes bundled tightly together. This was her life's blood, the sum of a lifetime spent hunched over a market stall, a symbol of her very existence. "Mum, what is all this? Why don't you put it in a bank?" "It's not safe here," Sharon asked, shocked, but Helen just shook her head. "Haven't you seen how the banks can just collapse? I don't trust them. This is the safest place for it." Then she added, "This is for you and Chloe later on. It's all yours when I'm gone." Helen's voice was filled with a deep love and trust for her family, but there was another pair of ears listening. Through the slightly ajar bedroom door, her granddaughter, Chloe, was watching the entire scene unfold. To her, Helen's words sounded entirely different. "It's all yours when I'm gone," twisted into a demonic whisper in her ear. "It only becomes yours when she is gone." That money, the product of her grandmother's lifelong struggle, was now seen by the debt-ridden Chloe as nothing more than an escape route, a way to clear her credit card bills. On the car ride to the airport, Chloe was unusually quiet. Her mother, Sharon, probably assumed she was just tired. But Chloe's mind was already back in the house in Unley. The location of the wardrobe, the size of the cash bundle, the lock on the front door. She was no longer a granddaughter. She was becoming a predator, and her own grandmother was her prey. As soon as she got back to Sydney, Chloe met up with her friend, Beck Miller. "You're not going to believe this. I've got a massive score. My Nan's place in Adelaide. She's got $100,000 in cash, just sitting there." Beck's eyes lit up. To two young women backed into a corner by debt and a thirst for thrills, $100,000 was like winning the lottery. Without hesitation, they began to plot the crime. How could they get the money without being caught? And more chillingly, if her Nan was still alive, she would go to the police. How could they silence her? The plan became more detailed, more sinister. They even rehearsed what they would do. The tragedy that began amidst the scent of carnations on a warm Mother's Day was now, under the harsh August sun, hurtling towards its horrific conclusion. On the morning of the 12th of August, 2005, a sedan pulled out of a rental car agency in Sydney. Beck Miller was behind the wheel, with Chloe Thompson in the passenger seat. To any onlooker, they would have looked like two university students heading off on a fun road trip. But their destination wasn't a sunny beach. They were heading to Unley, Adelaide, where Chloe's grandmother, Helen Carter, lived. It's over 1,300 kilometers from Sydney to Adelaide. Even driving non-stop, it's a journey of more than 14 hours. What did they talk about during that long drive across the vast, empty hay plain? What if she doesn't just hand over the money? What if she screams? They must have gone over their plan again and again. In their bags, instead of bikinis and sunscreen, were horrifying items. A knife to threaten her grandmother, gaffer tape and zip ties to restrain her. This wasn't a spontaneous act. From the moment they left Sydney, they had planned for the worst-case scenario, for murder. This was a calculated hunt. Even during the mundane moments, stopping at a roadhouse for a pie and a Coke, using the bathroom, their minds must have been filled with one number, 100,000. Meanwhile, the scene in Adelaide was starkly different. "Big day today, Helen?" "Picking out the biggest watermelon we've got," called the vendor at the market. Helen Carter's wrinkled face broke into a wide smile. "My granddaughter from Sydney is visiting with her friend," she replied. "Give me the sweetest, coldest one you have." Helen had been overjoyed when Chloe called. A busy university student, taking the time to come all this way to visit her old Nan. She'd woken up early, aired out the good guest blankets on the line, and gone to the market to buy watermelon and lamingtons, Chloe's favorites. She was completely oblivious to the fact that she was preparing for her own murderers, beaming with pride for the granddaughter who was traveling all that way. A journey Helen thought was an act of love. Just after 5 p.m., the car carrying Chloe and Beck passed through the Adelaide Hills and into the suburbs. Familiar streets, a familiar neighborhood. As they turned into the quiet, leafy street where Chloe had played as a child, what was going through her mind? Did she remember her Nan giving her lollies, or waving to her from the porch as she left for the airport? Or was her mind filled only with the terror of debt collection calls and the dazzling mirage of $100,000? The car finally stopped in front of her grandmother's house. Before they could even ring the doorbell, Helen, having heard the car pull up, threw the door open and rushed out. "Oh, my darling, you're here. You must be exhausted after that long drive." Helen, in her slippers, rushed out to grab her granddaughter's hands. Chloe didn't pull away from that warm, weathered touch. But her other hand was already gripping the bag that held the knife. The wolves, dressed not just in sheep's clothing, but in a granddaughter's, walked into what should have been the safest place in the world, their grandmother's home. Around 6 p.m. on the 12th of August, 2005, Helen Carter's living room was, for the first time in a long time, filled with life. Helen took the chilled watermelon from the fridge and carefully sliced it. "Chloe, darling, you look so thin from all that studying. You have to eat more." She picked out the sweetest, juiciest piece from the center and offered it to her granddaughter. In that moment, Chloe felt no guilt. Her mind was cold, calculating. She was already thinking about how her grandmother's life savings would pay off her debts. Tragically, her mind was no longer human. The small talk lasted for about half an hour. It was the last piece Helen would ever know. Chloe glanced at Beck. It was the prearranged signal. As Helen said, "Have another piece," and turned towards the kitchen to get the plate, the piece in the living room was shattered in a split second. She didn't even have time to scream. The granddaughter she trusted and her friend pounced like predators. An 82-year-old woman stood no chance against two strong 20-year-olds. As she fell to the floor, she might have instinctively called out her granddaughter's name. But what came back was not a helping hand, but a cold blade and the suffocating grip of gaffer tape. What the two did immediately after the attack defies all comprehension. A normal person would have been terrified, would have fled in a panic. But Chloe went to the kitchen. She put on a pair of yellow rubber gloves and started doing the washing up. She meticulously washed the knife Helen had used to cut the watermelon, the forks they had eaten with, and the weapon used in the attack, rinsing them carefully under the running tap. It was a cold, calculated act to remove their fingerprints and erase any trace of their visit. In the living room, the grandmother who had raised her lay bleeding to death, and just meters away in the kitchen, her granddaughter was calmly washing dishes. This single scene is perhaps the most horrific proof of the inhumanity of this crime. After finishing the dishes, they went straight to the bedroom. Their goal was singular, the $100,000 in the wardrobe Helen had boasted about. They tore through the drawers, sliced open bedding with a knife, searching every inch. Finally, from deep within the linen press, they found the newspaper-wrapped bundle. Found it. Chloe's triumphant shout. Clutching the bundles of cash they had traded for her grandmother's life, they walked out the front door without a single backward glance at the woman lying on the floor. They took the cash, a ring from her finger, and her mobile phone to stop anyone from calling her. At 7:30 p.m., as darkness fell over the quiet streets of Unley, the rental car with the two young women inside hit the motorway, heading back to Sydney. The car was filled with the sound of them counting the stolen money, and with their laughter. At that same moment, on the cold floor of her living room, Helen Carter's body was growing cold, alone amidst the sweet smell of the watermelon she had served and the metallic stench of her own blood. The 15th of August, 2005. Following a call from a concerned neighbor, Helen Carter's body was discovered. The house, once a warm and welcoming place for family gatherings, was now a cold crime scene, cordoned off with police tape. A few days later, a memorial service was held at a funeral home in Adelaide. In the portrait, Helen was smiling kindly, dressed in her Sunday best, but the grief in front of the photo was thicker than any incense smoke. The most distraught person there was, of course, her only daughter, Sharon. "Oh, Mum, who did this to you? My poor Mum, what am I going to do?" Sharon was inconsolable, collapsing to the floor in tears. After a lifetime of hardship, her mother had been brutally murdered, just as she was supposed to be enjoying her old age. How could words ever express that kind of anguish? But beside her, there was another grieving family member, her granddaughter, Chloe. Dressed in black, she supported her mother, tears streaming endlessly down her face. When mourners came to offer their condolences, saying, "Your Nan loved you so much," Chloe would bow her head and sob. To anyone watching, she was the picture of a heartbroken, loving granddaughter. But we know the truth. Her tears were not of grief, but of a flawless performance. Just days earlier, with those same hands, she had ended her grandmother's life and put on rubber gloves to wash away the blood. Now, with those same hands, she was serving sausage rolls and sandwiches to the mourners. The homicide detectives assigned to the case also attended the funeral. They weren't there to pay their respects. It's an old saying in police work that the killer always returns to the scene of the crime, or in this case, the funeral. Their eyes were sharp. The lack of forced entry and the fact that only some valuables were taken pointed toward someone who knew the victim. The detectives observed the family members, but not one of them cast a suspicious glance at the slender, grieving granddaughter. They simply couldn't imagine that the girl crying so hysterically, clinging to her mother, could be the monster who had murdered her own grandmother. It was an act of depravity beyond comprehension. Chloe was counting on this. She calculated that if she hid behind the mask of a grieving family member, no one would ever suspect her. On the stage of the funeral home, she was the lead actress, delivering a perfect performance. As her grandmother's ashes were scattered into the sea off the Adelaide coast, and while her family was lost in grief, Chloe sent a text message to her friend, Beck. "Hey, the cops were here, but they don't suspect a thing. My acting was Oscar-worthy, lol." Before her grandmother's ashes had even settled, she was bragging about her acting skills, relieved. But there was one thing she had overlooked, that her seemingly perfect play had a fatal flaw. The sharp blade of forensic science was already closing in on her. There is no such thing as a perfect crime. It's the eternal truth of criminal investigation. Chloe and Beck may have believed their crime was flawless, but they couldn't fool a team of veteran detectives. The investigative team focused on the unnatural elements of the crime scene. Only cash and jewelry were missing. Valuable electronics and antiques were untouched, and most importantly, the cut watermelon and the washed-up dishes. This clearly indicated that the killer was intimately familiar with the house and very close to the victim. The detectives began to re-examine the alibis of the family members. Among them, the story of the granddaughter, Chloe, who claimed to have been in Sydney on the day of the murder, raised questions. She said she was shopping with a friend in Sydney, but there was no solid evidence to prove her whereabouts at that specific time. The clue was on the highway. In 2005, dashcams were not common, but highway toll systems were well established. Detectives started digging into Chloe's circle of friends and discovered a car had been rented under Beck Miller's name. When they tracked the license plate of that rental car, a shocking fact was revealed. On August 12th, the day of the murder, the car rented by Beck was recorded leaving a Sydney toll plaza and entering Adelaide via the southeastern freeway. The girls who claimed to be in Sydney had in fact driven over 1,300 kilometers to Adelaide. And the science didn't stop there. Although it was the era of flip phones, mobile phone tower triangulation was possible. The mobile phone signals of Chloe and Beck did not lie. At the estimated time of the murder, both of their phones were pinging off a mobile tower near Helen Carter's house in Unley. Their alibi was shattered. All the evidence pointed in one direction, to the loving granddaughter. On the 2nd of September, 2005, detectives were urgently dispatched to Sydney. Chloe and Beck were arrested in a cafe in Paddington. It's reported that right up until their arrest, they were spending the stolen money on designer clothes, sipping lattes without a care in the world, dressed in clothes bought with their grandmother's blood money. We didn't think she would give us the money, so we did it. The confession at the police station was disturbingly simple. The excuse? Credit card debt, payday loans. They just needed the money. For a reason to kill someone, it was appallingly trivial. That the victim was the grandmother who raised them made it monstrous. But the most brutal moment of this case was yet to come. It was the moment Chloe's mother, Sharon, learned the whole truth. Rushing to the police station, Sharon couldn't believe what the detectives were telling her. "My Chloe, that's impossible. You have no idea how much she adored her Nan." But when she saw her daughter in a holding cell and heard the words, "Mom, I'm sorry," fall from her daughter's lips, Sharon's world fell apart. Before she could even process the grief of losing her mother, she was confronted with the hellish reality that her own daughter was the killer. That day, the hallways of the police station were filled with Sharon's primal screams. It wasn't just the cry of a mother who had lost her child, but the shriek of a human being whose soul was being torn apart by the severing of the most sacred family bond. In 2006, at the Supreme Court of South Australia, the first verdict was handed down in the Unley granny murder case that had shocked the nation. The judge delivered a sentence close to the maximum penalty for the accused, Chloe Thompson and Beck Miller. The defendants brutally murdered the grandmother, who raised one of them for personal financial gain. This is an anti-humanitarian crime that abandons even the minimum decency required of a human being. The verdict was life imprisonment, a permanent separation from society. Her bright future, her prestigious university degree, all of it was shattered, traded for $100,000. Chloe finally broke down and cried with regret, but it was too late. The cold steel door of the prison cell had slammed shut. The moment she had walked out of her grandmother's house, the door to her own life had closed forever. But the true victim in this case is someone else entirely. It is Sharon Chloe's mother and Helen Carter's daughter. In one devastating blow, she lost her mother and her daughter. The person who murdered her mother was the child she had carried and given birth to. In the face of this incomprehensible tragedy, who could she blame? Who could she even cry for? Throughout the trial, Sharon sat in the very back row of the public gallery, weeping silently. Guilt towards her mother, anger towards her daughter, and a crushing self-blame for how she had raised her. Her family tree was brutally ripped to shreds by this crime. The pain she must carry for the rest of her life, branded with the label of being the mother of a monster, is a weight we can barely imagine. That $100,000, which Helen Carter had spent her whole life protecting, ultimately belonged to no one. She used to say it all the time. "It'll all be yours when I'm gone." She meant it. If Chloe had just broken down and told her grandmother, "Nan, I'm in so much trouble," what would have happened? Helen probably would have pulled out the bundles of cash from the wardrobe, given her a clip over the ear, and then cooked her a warm, comforting meal. Because that's what grandmothers do. That's the unconditional love they have. But blinded by greed, the granddaughter couldn't wait. The moment you put a price tag on love, family becomes worse than strangers. They become enemies. Take a moment now to look at the family beside you. They are more precious than any jewel, more valuable than any bundle of cash. Money can be earned again, but a family bond, once broken, can never be mended. We must never forget the lesson from the Unley Granny murder, a story of a grandmother's love taken too soon, and the unending sorrow of those left behind. If today's story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel, The Accused, and give this video a like. We'll be back next time with another case that must not be forgotten, a story that needs to be remembered. Thank you for watching.